All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Beyond Borders Summit. Super excited to have all of you here. My name is Steph, and I'm the talent lead at Localize. And today we're going to be talking all about hiring beyond borders. This is, of course, a topic I being a recruiter myself, and with the war for talent being what it is, it's becoming increasingly difficult to fill critical roles. And here with me, I have two experts in international hiring. I'm super excited to kick off this chat and to learn a lot from them as well. First up, we have Adriaan Kolff, co-founder and CEO at MatcHR. Adriaan, let me hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for having me, Stephanie. And excited to share some of the knowledge of hiring internationally. So I'm Adriaan. I am the co-founder and CEO of MatcHR and the co-founder of Pantala, serial entrepreneur in the recruitment industry. And basically, what we do with MatcHR is we help fast-growing tech companies by providing them remote embedded talent teams in the recruitment space. So we are a fully remote company. We have employees in 17 different countries, spread over 5 different continents. So I know a thing or two about hiring internationally and also working internationally, right? For the majority of the companies like TikTok, Booking, Stripe, Revolut that we work for, we help them hire talents from across the globe. And with Pantala, we help companies hire remote software engineers in South Africa, and also based on their time zone. So also there, a big international play to help companies tap into the South African market, but in general, in other markets as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Adriaan. Great to have you here. Next up, we have Brett Jones, one of our co-founders over at OfferZen. Great to have you, Brett. Tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Steph. I'm one of the co-founders at OfferZen. I've been in recruiting for a long time now. I think I started in 2006 in London. Back then, I was probably one of the only recruiters out there with a computer science degree. So I once thought I was going to be a dev and somehow landed in recruitment, as you kind of do, I guess. Fast forward a few years after working in London for a while in recruiting, I started a recruitment agency in South Africa, ran that for some time in Cape Town. And then in 2015, I co-founded OfferZen with my co-founders, Milan and Phil. What we do at OfferZen is we help companies hire software engineers through our platform. We originally started in South Africa, and we're very big here, and we've placed thousands of software engineers in South Africa over the last few years. And we've been expanding and growing into Europe into the last 2 years. And really what we're trying to do is connect the developer community in Europe with other developers in the rest of Europe, as well as throughout Africa and South Africa. So there's a huge amount of opportunity for people to hire really talented people throughout the world. And one of the things we believe at OfferZen is that there's talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. And so it's a big thing for us to be able to help connect people to better opportunities through that. So it's been about 7 years since we've been doing the thing, and we're now helping people in about 18 different countries. So it's been pretty cool.
Wow, cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks both for joining, and of course, everyone for hopping on. As you can see in the chat, we've already gotten started with the poll, so go ahead and place your vote on whether you already hire international talent or not, so we can kick off the chat. Starting up, we want to dive into some misconceptions. We want to get an understanding of what misconceptions are there with regards to hiring internationally, what challenges are potentially facing companies about hiring internationally, or what do we think is there, but it's actually not necessarily true. Adriaan, maybe you can kick us off on that one. What would you say is something you've come across with some of your customers?
Yeah, well, not so much customer. It's more of a personal story, to be honest. Because when I started MatcHR, me being Dutch, we started MatcHR in Ukraine. So by late 2018, I moved to Ukraine to set up our first office there and hire Ukrainians to work for international companies. And one of the misconceptions I had as well, Ukraine, very different culture. It's much more Eastern European. They're not used to work for Western-based kind of companies. I heard stories about you need to be very direct in terms of being the boss. And there were a lot of misconceptions actually before I went into Ukraine and started hiring there. because it turned out is that people are still people, right?
It's funny that, isn't it?
Right? Like the majority of these misperceptions turn out to be just false and not true. And with any kind of team or any kind of company, you still hire for company fit, right? You still hire for cultural fit, independent of where someone comes from in terms of their nationality, right? And that was something I actually learned when I experienced it myself, hiring our first team in Ukraine, and see how easy they were able to adapt and work for international clients. So that was one that I really had to go through. But I also saw the misconception at some of the clients that we worked for, and I'll give you an example. There was a big retail company in the Netherlands, and we had a close relationship with them. They were interested in our service to hire a recruiter for us, but they ended up working with a solution that was twice the price that we offered, just because it was a Dutch person and they felt more comfortable with working with the Dutch person than a Ukrainian representing their brand in the market. Now, fast forward to today, we had to go through COVID before they realized is that, hey, talent, to Brett's point, can really be found anywhere, right? And now they're actually one of our clients, and that whole issue of them not being in the office and them being Ukrainian actually is no longer a thing. And we've been able to work for them and actually be successful. And they now realize hey, they basically had to open up their eyes. Unfortunately, we had to have COVID for them to realize that. And we've seen that happen across the market, right? Especially COVID, I don't need to explain it, but the big push to remote and now people hiring across the globe and the continued growth that we see happening there. Has opened up so many opportunities, and luckily has also killed a lot of stereotypes to that extent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I can absolutely relate to that, being a South African living and working in Germany, and working for a global company as well. Brett, tell us about your experience.
Yes, it's interesting. I was going to comment on something Adriaan said as well. It's just that, I think, I think it's so funny how we had to have a worldwide pandemic to get people to change their view. But I think the reason is that as human beings, we are just sort of programmed to stick with the status quo. It's how we work as humans, right? Once we figured out something that we do, we keep doing that because it works. And you need some sort of big event or some sort of thing to make you change. So I think just as a practical thing, that's where we are now. But it's really weird. I think people, I guess, for what I see is people just think it's a lot harder than it is. Yeah. And I think that's, again, because there's so many unknowns, people are really just, again, we're hardwired to be afraid of what we don't know. And so we're in recruiting and hiring, so much of it is based on sort of quick shortcuts, which are really biases, right? That we create to be able to decide whether we should, we look at a CV in 7 seconds and decide whether we should even read any further. Those are all just little biases that you're working with. And it's the same sort of thing now. We put those to international hiring, and we're going, oh God, I'm going to hire someone from the Ukraine or Nigeria. They're, what's going on here? And you immediately fill in those blanks with bad things or other things people tell you. And so I think, unfortunately, the reason it is the way it is, and all these misconceptions, is just because of the way our human brains are wired. We are wired not to want to do these things, and we have to fight them consciously to do so. And that's hard for us to do. We have to have some reason to do so. So absolutely. Yeah, and I think so why do people do it then? Or why do you not do it? Well, you don't do it because it's working okay enough for you. You're managing to hire people in the country that you're in now, and you're only hiring local talent. And maybe it's hard, but hiring's always hard, So, how do I know when to just now really take the leap and hire outside of the country and look for other people? And I think sometimes you kind of need to, you need that kind of push to do it. And I think another problem can be with the reason why we're not doing it is people in talent acquisition and maybe other people in the company, I guess, are acutely aware of what it's like to source talent at the top of the funnel, right? It's hard. It's a really hard job to go out and source people. You have to speak to hundreds of people to get like one person even interested in someone. And what a hiring manager sees is just one person coming to an interview, and they're like, oh, it's easy. You know, your recruiting job is simple, right? Like, just get me people and get me more of them. And you're like, well, do you know how hard we had to fight to get that one person to come and see you? And so I think being able to like, the problem is the people making the decisions don't see that as much. So I think talent acquisition people really need to be able to like highlight that to the people who make these decisions, because they are hard decisions to make, but they don't have all the data to make them.
Totally.
Those are some of the things I'm saying, at least. I don't know if that resonates with you, Adriaan.
Yeah, I can only relate to that extent. One of the things is what I see for a lot of people as a hurdle when they consider like international recruitment, whether it's relocation or whether it's hiring remotely, is the unknown of bringing kind of like a different culture and a different person into the team, but especially the integration part, right? It's like, we already have a culture. It's either an office-based culture, right? Like, how do we get people in? Like, that's going to be hard. How's this person going to be connected? What if we go through this process and this person leaves, right? Like, those are kind of like often like hurdles. I see people like already putting all the kind of like things that could go wrong and therefore not pursued and like actually do it, right? But then you have this funny sayings, right? Like, what if we, there's this CEO quote, what if we train our people and they leave? And then the CEO says, but what if we train them and they stay, right? You know, and you hire someone with the intention that it's going to be someone that fits in your culture, fits in your team, is actually going to make a difference, right? And that should be the sole focus of who you bring on board to that extent, versus this person from a different background, how we can make it work. No, it always takes work to integrate people, right? And you need to be intentional of that and know that, but look at it from the bright side, because the biggest opportunity of not hiring in your local market is, and I'm speaking to you, Stephanie, right? Speaking to Brett. I mean, you guys are absolute experts on this as well. There's talent everywhere.
Yeah.
100%.
And the thing there, right, is like, I say this a lot to customers and people I'm speaking to, is it's, you know, if you're thinking about hiring talent, and like we're in this world where, you know, hey, you work remotely or you want to find people from other places or not, but like you want to be increasing the size of the pool that you're like, the available talent pool, and every choice you make can either make it bigger or make it smaller. And in a like my area of expertise is software engineering and tech hiring, and that's, you know, everyone needs more software engineers. There's never enough. There never will be enough. So you need to make the pool bigger. But yet what we do in every part of our hiring process and decisions we make, we go like, you know, everyone must have a degree. No, they don't need a degree. Like, you've already cut out a whole bunch of people now. Or like, everyone must be in our city. No, they don't need to be in your city. Like, these and doing things like that really, you know, reduce the number of people you can hire. I think like one of the interesting things, we do an annual report in South Africa, at least, where we survey thousands of software engineers. One of the questions I was reviewing today from the data that's going to come out, we asked developers, you know, if you saw a job advert without a salary on it, would you apply or not? And 42% said no, they wouldn't apply. So now it's not really relevant to international hiring, but it's a thing again where you're making a choice. If you don't put a salary on your advert, you're basically decreasing the size of the people, the available talent pool, by 40%. And something like, you know, choosing to only hire people locally, or, you know, not from other countries to bring them in, really reduces that size of your talent pool, and it's only going to make your life harder. Why would you make it harder when it's already very hard? This is, you know, the kind of thing.
No, it's a very good point. And I can actually speak from my own experience. I mean, when I started applying for jobs in Europe, I think I applied for over 100 jobs and I heard back from maybe 10. Most of them were negative, the ones I did hear back from. And I think only 4 of them actually responded to me. And I only started getting responses when I actually said in possession of a visa at the top of my CV, the first thing you would read as a recruiter. And I said, I changed my location to Berlin to say that that's where I want to be, instead of saying that I'm currently in South Africa. And only then did I start getting responses, and I would sit down with recruiters and they'd realize that I have the visa. I didn't have to, you know, they didn't have to go through that effort. But even on top of that, you know, getting the visa is sometimes the same length, if not shorter, than a termination period. A lot of termination periods across Germany can be up to 3 months long. Sometimes some visa processes can take just a couple of weeks. So it really is about, you know, changing that thought that it might take so much longer to bring this person in. You mentioned, you know, they might leave. Anyone could leave. someone that's right here in the country, able to start next week, could also leave.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah, you don't own your employees, right? Like the reason whether they stay or go is really on you for the most part as an employer. It's not like, yes, human beings make decisions and they go, but if you're the one who, or as the one as a company entity, are the ones who are trying to keep people. If they leave, it's probably on you.
100%. So we've looked at a little bit of the misconceptions. I'm curious, when you're sitting down with your customers, you've mentioned, you pull on the data. Tell me a little bit more about the data when it comes to hiring internationally. Where are these pockets of talent sitting? What are you seeing in terms of trends when it comes to hiring from other countries? You both have experience hiring specifically developers from South Africa, but what trends are you picking up on?
I mean, I can speak to some of the numbers, I guess, around South Africa and Africa. I think what's interesting, we've done some research, and this, and other folks have done lots of research on the number of like estimated developers throughout the world and in other areas. You can look at like in Europe, I think and I'm including UK in that as well, and there are estimates of around like, I think 3 to 4 million developers in that area. Then I think it's about 3 million. And then if you look at Africa, which sits in the time zone of Europe, but yet many people are not thinking about hiring from there as much, especially South Africa a little bit more, but then the rest of Africa, there's close to 1 million developers there, and that number is increasing more than anywhere else. Google released a really interesting report, and they do this annually now. The rate of which developers were increasing in Africa was far higher, if not double, than what it is anywhere in Europe. So there are more and more developers, being trained and coming out of Africa than they are elsewhere. And yeah, in South Africa alone, I think there's over 120,000, which is a big talent pool. But I think, again, people don't necessarily know how they can access them or where they can. I think that's one of the challenges I've seen. Is we've spoken about all the misconceptions and the things that people are worried about, but let's say you're converted, you're now like, I'm sold, I need to hire internationally, I'm going to either hire them remotely or bring them in or whatever, and I want a big talent pool. But then what do? You have to go, where do we look, how do we find them? And those are the that's where it gets tricky as well. And for me, it's about like there are many ways you can do this, and I'll let Adriaan, I suppose, go first before just hogging the thing. Yeah, but I think there are many ways of solving that, but it is hard even once you've made the decision to figure that out.
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting, right, is that I recently spoke with Job, the CEO of remote.com, and I asked him, like, what do you guys see in the data happening, right? Like, do you guys see any impact on the potential recession, hiring slowing down, etc.? And what he shared actually is that they were planning that their revenue would go down a little bit, and that they would see a slowdown in bringing in new clients. But he's seen the exact reverse. And the reason for it is that they realize is that, yes, companies are slowing down with their hiring. It's not as crazy as it was at the beginning of the year, but companies are more cost conscious. And therefore, instead of hiring in more expensive countries like Western Europe or the US, for example, are now actually, for the hiring that they're doing, even though that has slowed down, looking across borders, because they realized, and people know, right, is that talent can be found anywhere. And if I hire outside of the country that I just mentioned, most likely I will be able to attract talent for a more cost efficient way, which was interesting. So again, they were able to grow above the target that they had set, and I found this a fascinating statistics actually, and it's such a strong data point to realize is that this wave of international hiring continues to grow as it does, and secondly, what we've seen and what we've done from our personal experience is when we transitioned from being an office-based culture in Ukraine. COVID then forced us to become a fully remote company, is we kind of like stumbled upon our first international hire. There was our former head of growth was based in Russia. We already had a close connection with her, and it actually worked so seamlessly. She integrated so well on the team, and it was such an easy transition actually. Now with the current situation, Russia and Ukraine would probably have been much more difficult, but this was before the war. And that was the epiphany moment that we realized, like, wait, we can onboard her so easily remotely from Russia to our Ukrainian team that's now working remotely. Why do we continue to focus on Ukraine? So that's when we start to hire in different countries. The thing that we found the most difficult is, where do you then start? Because it sounds great. It's like, okay, we can hire globally, right? Holy shit. Type in a Google search that you normally do for a city with the world as a location, right? Overwhelming. And it took us a while to kind of like build a strategy that we realized, okay, this is kind of like what works. And if I would give advice in terms of what we've gone through, is be deliberate on first on the legal and compliance issues that you might have. Look at the time zone that you want to hire, right? Those are kind of like the foundations before you just start diving into a country where you realize, hey, we actually can't relocate or hire someone remotely from these countries. So make sure that is done, time zone and the legal and compliance issues. And then look, one, at your competitors. Do they have people from certain countries that you know that they have either relocated people from or have already people hiring? That was a strong data point for us. To then, like, hey, if they're working for them, then there are probably going to be more of those kind of people. We ask our employees as well. It's like, hey, based on the work that your guys are doing for TikTok, for Booking, for Revolut, right? Where do you see that they relocate the most talent from? Again, indication is like, hey, those are probably pockets with companies that we also would like to hire from. And then we start to deliberately go country by country.
Yeah, I would agree there as well, Adriaan. Like, that country by country thing is important, right? Otherwise, if you just go completely wide, it can end up badly. I've spoken to head of talent recently who they said, they're hiring a really particular skill set, like it was like closure engineers or something. And they're like, well, we'll just take people from anywhere in the world. We're based in the US and we just need them, so we'll take them anywhere. And then they found they had like 30 different people from all over the world, like in every single time zone you can imagine, and from every different culture. And this is when those problems come in, because now you're going, well, we've got 30 different people from 30 different cultures and 30 different time zones who we haven't really planned for this. And that's where things get hard.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're going, okay, well, let's just make it a little bit easier on ourselves and pick people in our time zone from a specific set of countries where we can learn the cultural things, quirks and whatever, then it's a lot, and have a plan to integrate the people, then it works really well. It's about being intentional, I think, is the important part, and not just going, oh, let's YOLO, let's hope for the best, hire from anywhere.
Yeah. And to be honest, Brett, we did the first. So we were
just most people do, right?
In the candy store. We're like, this is great.
And then, exactly. Talent is everywhere. Just let it come.
And also it took us relatively long to like capture the data to realize which countries actually made it to at least the offer stage. And because we were in the beginning so spread, we didn't really track that. So that's kind of like after 4 or 5 months in of pretty unsuccessful hiring, I must say. That's when we really start to be much more deliberate in terms of our focus and also tracking the data, so that we now know, hey, these are the countries where we have a higher likelihood to hire the people that we want versus other countries where we've just been unsuccessful for whatever reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more then about some of the tactics and strategies you have been using, because now you've done all that research, you dove in, you went crazy, you tried a little bit of everywhere. What did you see? What did you notice? Where are these pockets of talent sitting?
So if I answer it from my side, I think it's very role specific, right? Where you want to need to hire people. So for MatcHR, we hire recruiters. We've seen from our personal experience in Africa that South Africa and Nigeria have been our most successful countries where we've hired the people that we need to hire to be able to work for us. Eastern Europe has been successful. Where we've been highly unsuccessful, and I honestly don't know why, is in Portugal, Spain, and Italy. We've not been able to hire the talent that we want to hire and been successful there, versus Eastern Europe and Africa.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting there, though, right, is again, like you kind of alluded to this at the start of the conversation, is one of the misconceptions people have is around like assuming that but we're all people, and we're all like to be treated like people and everything. And assuming that, just because, hey, Italian or South African is like now an entire nationality is just like boiled down to, oh, well, we can't hire South Africans anymore. And it's like, well, actually, maybe it's just because you spoke to a few who you didn't like. It has nothing to do with to do with that. But unfortunately, that is the way in which you have to go about this. Is you kind of have to go with these kind of pockets, but you also have to step away from it a little bit and go like, maybe it wasn't to do with Italian people that I couldn't hire them, or to do with us. Maybe we just had the wrong people and it was just easier somewhere else. So we've gravitated to that. And I've often seen people and spoken to people about like, oh no, we can't hire people from this country. And I'm like, but that's a ridiculous state. Like, why? Like, oh, well, we had a few bad experiences. I'm like, okay, so there's 40 million people in the country and you've now said everyone is bad because you spoke to 10 people who weren't great for you. And that's just how people work, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what approach do you take then in that situation? What do you use to convince them that this would be a good move?
The hard part is I think it's about having some good people that fit someone, right? And I think that can change anyone's mind. But that will change someone's mind if they believe that. But unfortunately, I think people, once you've made that like decision, it's either you who's made it, or potentially it's not you who's made it at all, and maybe it's your boss or the company itself, and then having to convince everyone is sort of like a fool's errand, and you can't, unfortunately. I think it's that, like those assumptions are that strong that almost you can't. But for people who are more aware of these things and can step outside of that and actually have the ability to then influence the decisions, I think it's about the awareness thing that's the most important. I don't know, and I think like some of the things that I've found work, at least, or that I've noticed with different, and maybe this isn't related exactly to changing people's minds, but one of the tactics we've seen work really well, and what you'll notice happens organically when people start to hire people from other countries is, like Steph, like people from the localized have hired you now, right? And there's like South African. I am almost certain that there'll be more South Africans popping up at localized, right? And that kind of happens as you start to hire people from a particular nationality. It happens organically because now the organization goes, oh well, we trust Steph, so therefore all South Africans are good. So that's the opposite of that. And then also I think you can also leverage that a bit more as an employer. Like you go, great, we've hired some people from this place, and like Steph, for example. Steph, who do you know in SA who would be great here, or how can you help us leverage more people to this? How could you help us leverage our brand in South Africa? What do we need to do? And you could really leverage your employees who you've hired from other countries to help tap into those talent pools. And I think double down on the ones you already have, because you already know them. You're not going to be fighting that mistrust and stuff, and you could go to someone in the C-suite and say, look, we need to hire from South Africa, and like, okay, well, yeah, great, we've got 5 South Africans already. Yeah, double down on it, go for it. Like it makes sense. So really like lean into that when you can. I think works really well.
That's such a good point, especially leaning on your network, right? When I just started hiring in Europe, I remember going onto LinkedIn and I was just messaging everyone I could about any open roles we had, and not asking them if they were interested in applying, but rather saying, hi, I'm new to the Europe community, and I'd really love to connect, to understand what the talent market is like out there. So I was really just trying to like network. Maybe I had devious, intentions afterwards, but to begin with, I wanted to really understand the market. I wanted to see, what talent is out there. You mentioned earlier, about doing research. Sometimes you get used to, certain universities are popping up, certain, talent pockets are popping up. You mentioned certain companies. You might start looking at companies that match the tech stack that you use, and then start targeting those. So it's really an interesting step to take. Like once you dig, it's like you get into that wormhole and you just get deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also ways to do that. Like, I think there's also, if you don't really have that luxury at the moment, maybe you're all from the same country, you don't have an international team yet. I think there are ways to generate that other than doing the research. You can also get some inbound, and so let's say you're open to hiring, relocating people, or remotely. There's a ton of remote specific job boards out there. Go put some jobs out there and see where people are applying from. Talk to some people. Put them on relocation job boards, like there's specific ones for that, and you're going to get some inbound from places and see where people start like leading you. Maybe you're going to find a few from a certain place, and then you can start going, that seems like a good place. So you don't have to do it completely on your own. There are ways to get a few like leads coming your way, which then tell you which way to like dive into. Because again, it's a bit of like, oh, I can hire from anywhere. That's like looking at a blank page and saying write a novel, right? Like it's scary. Yeah. You're kind of like, where do I start? And so you can get some stuff coming to you before you have to go down and like do it all from scratch.
Yeah, very good point. I see we have a question coming in from the audience. Amelia has asked, what is your company culture like when you hire people from different nationalities or countries? What do you do, or do you do something special for them to adapt to your environment? Think about maybe some of your customers and insights you've gotten from them. Do you have any stories about a customer that's hired from a unique country for the first time?
Well, I've definitely have many stories for our own company, right? Where we have 17 different countries and nationalities in our company, from Armenia to Australia to South Africa to the Netherlands to the US, right? So it's a whole melting pot of different nationalities, and everyone's fully remote, right? So when we hire people, we've never actually seen them physically, except for these beautiful little Zoom screens that we have these days, right? So one thing, country independent, we just look for a certain mindset and skill set, right? Like how you would do that in any kind of interview. And especially what we've learned over time, because we're a fully remote company, what we are very specific on is someone actually very proactive in his or her way of doing. And with juniors, that starts with, how do you prepare for the interview, right? Because we want to look for the people that have prepared, that gone through the website, that connect with everyone on LinkedIn, did extra research on that. Because that means that when the camera's off, and that's the most difficult thing, what we've learned with a remote company, is when the camera is off, they will start to look for solutions themselves. Because in an office environment, it's easier to steer kind of the people that are not necessarily naturally inclined to do that. But those are kind of like the things that we then specifically look for, right? So that's an important company value and factor that we look for. One thing is that we request everyone to do in their onboarding. We have a social checklist to have random coffee moments with people, do a random picture challenge, do a random dress-up party, and present something about their country. Because everyone's very proud of their country. And that's absolutely beautiful to actually put people in their power and share something about their country and their traditions.
I think leaning into that is really important, right? Because it's getting people to talk about what they're like, and everyone is really proud of where they're from. And and especially if you're remote, they're still where they are. They're there and they're talking about it, and they're getting to talk about it to other people, and then they're seeing other people proud of where they're from. And now you have something in common immediately, and cool, like great. Now you get on a bit, like it just works. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that's important. And I don't know if you ever heard of the book called The Culture Map, written by Aaron Myers.
Yes.
Okay, I see you guys now. Phenomenal book, right? I can highly recommend the book for anyone that's working in an international environment. It doesn't have to be relocation or remote or whatsoever. And it basically shares across 8 dimensions of where does a culture map on business type of dimensions. And one of the things is how to give feedback. Right? Me being Dutch, the funny thing was to read the book, the Dutch are almost on every single aspect on the far left side of the scale, where people from Japan are on almost the far right of every scale. So us Dutch, our culture is to give feedback very directly. Where in the Japanese culture, that's the last thing that anyone would ever do. They give extreme indirect feedback. So you really need to read between the lines of what's actually being said. And then, for example, of how are decisions made. In Japan, the boss makes every decision, no one else makes the decision. Dutch culture, let's do a group process. Let's make sure that everyone's aligned. Let's talk about this. Let's make sure that all eyes are on the same path and that everyone agreed upon it, right? Knowing those intricacies of everyone in the company, where they culturally naturally come from, is very powerful. So we have this written down in our employee handbook that everyone gets access to. And one of the first things in their week, what they need to do is go through the different cultures that we have in our company and see where their culture is mapped on these different skills, so that they understand with their manager, understand with some of the people in the company, and especially with a Dutch boss and founder, maybe giving very direct feedback that in some cultures would be very offensive. And in my culture, I wouldn't have a clue that would be the case, right? Is helpful to kind of try to overcome.
That's really funny as well, because especially you point out like it's, you know, having a very direct boss. It's scary for someone, especially if they're not used to someone being direct anyway, because now a very direct and a boss is very scary. Meanwhile, you're not being scary. You're actually just being like, hey, I'm being really kind. I'm giving you good, honest feedback and not messing you around. So it's really interesting. I like the way you've baked that into your onboarding as well. I think it's something we should probably steal. I'm gonna pass on to our team. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. But I think with the stuff you're pointing out, right, is about getting people to be aware and understand one another, and to actually just like consider that what the other person is saying, and that they're just treat them like a person, as opposed to like thinking, I think if you understand people, then and try to understand people better, then it really helps everyone get along a little bit better and not go crazy.
Yeah.
I was having a chat about this with someone on a Donut Buddies chat a while back, actually, and we were talking about how emojis in Slack, the way in which you emote or don't emote also sends a different message to certain people. So I'm one of those people that puts way too many emojis in everything I say, and then you get people that don't at all, and I'm like, are you angry with me?
Yes, I've learned, because I'm quite direct too. I need to make sure I put emojis in, because then it like I can be direct, and then I put a little smiley face or some crazy emoji. Then it's like, oh, okay, that's a little bit better. But yeah, you mentioned things like donuts as well. We assumed, like, we also use that app where everyone in the team and the company can get to talk to one another. And I think it makes a huge difference when people just from like different cultures and different teams get to speak to each other about things that they don't normally get to like cross paths maybe in the office anymore, and talk to each other, and just getting to learn about how other cultures are and what's going on really does help.
Yeah, definitely. Hard to tell when you're in South Africa when you hear a hardy-da in the background, right? That's the classic South African sound.
There you go.
If you were ever in hiding, everyone would know where you are at this point. That's one of my favorite sounds. It's one of the sounds I miss the most from being in Germany. You don't hear bird sounds when you're in Berlin.
Stephanie, with the knowledge that you have now of relocating from South Africa to Berlin, like, what was your experience of going through that process?
Yeah, huge. Great question. So for me, I actually moved during the pandemic. So I moved, and it was the first time where I started at a company fully remotely. So of course, that's super intimidating, especially not just being in a new company, but you're in a foreign country. They don't speak the same language as you. Luckily, I joined an all English company, which helped a lot. I've heard experiences of people joining mainly German companies, and it's been a bit more intimidating for them. But in my situation, I was lucky. I think one of the things that was really great is that I had a team that basically were a virtual shoulder to tap on. And that's something I've tried to do now when I onboard new people. What I mean by that is you don't have someone to turn around to on your desk and just ask like, hey, where do I find this? Or what do I do this? We were talking about it earlier, like things that you would usually ask, you just have to be scrappy and you have to just figure it out for yourself. So I think having that virtual shoulder to tap on, things like the buddy system work really well, where from your first day, you're connected with someone and you can just go to them and ask them what might seem like the most ridiculous question, but actually isn't. And that really helps to make you feel more settled. I think a lot of, when I first, I think a lot of people during the pandemic did the whole virtual online, recess or drinks or whatever they did company-wide. A little bit, it crashed and died after a little while. But I think things like Donut and having those connection points are super, super important. And those are things that really help me. And then just documentation, like literally having, like what I've started doing is I realized, if I couldn't find this, I want people to be able to self-serve themselves. So I want people to be able to say, if I don't know where to look for this, I can search it here. I can search it in Notion or on Slack or something, and I'll find the information I need. So really just documenting everything. That's what's helped me in a remote world. From a cultural perspective, I think South Africans are really lucky in that South Africa is very multicultural. So what I realized was, you were talking earlier, about cultural differences. I was working with a lot of American colleagues and then a lot of German colleagues. And the Germans are a lot more direct than the Americans. So I was constantly flipping between adding fluff and then removing the fluff. So that for me was, we lost Brett. That for me was super interesting, dynamic to try and figure out. And I think South Africans have a little advantage with that one, because we're used to hopping between all the different cultures. But definitely is an interesting thing to learn. Yeah.
So what we said, so when you guys now relocate, like what are the kind of like top 3 things that you should have in place, or like should do to make that a good experience and make sure that employees feel welcome?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really just information, as much information as possible. It's super overwhelming to relocate to a new country, right? There's so much you have to do. You have to register your tax number, then you have to register your apartment. You have to find an apartment, which in and of itself is a big, hurdle. So all of those different things, when you're constantly trying to do that whilst also concentrating on having a new job, what I find is, as an HR team and as a people team, if you can set up your employee with all their other things that they need to do their best job, then that's good. You're going to set them up for success. I always think of it like Maslow's hierarchy, right? If you want to reach self-actualization, you need to have your basic needs met. And basic needs met include having an apartment and all of that. So if you as a people team can support them with getting all of the tools, structures, initial setup that they need, information, sharing blog articles, sharing a guide about what it means to relocate to this country, interesting restaurants or bars around the area, all of that. If you can set up, that initial layer of basic needs, then you're going to get a lot of employees that are self-actualizing.
Awesome. I love it.
Awesome.
I love it. Working for localized and having their own experience. Great.
Yeah, it's super interesting. All right, well, I guess we are wrapping up. It looks like we lost Britt. I don't know if he's going to hop back on, but it was super, super interesting chat. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And thanks so much to everyone that hopped on and joined as well. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. And of course, stay or join the next one. Next up, we have a product session coming up. But otherwise, it was wonderful. And yeah, have a beautiful day. Britt, we're just signing off.
Sorry, I think my internet died for a second, so I lost you guys for a moment. But yes, thanks very much for having me.
Yes. Thanks for joining, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, or day, depending on where you are. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.